Hello, and welcome to something a little bit different from the Elmwood Chamber Orchestra. My name is Colm Mohan, and I'm the current conductor of the ensemble. And today I will be bringing to you a conversation with our distinguished guest, Sir James Macmillan. Before I introduce our guest properly, I would like to thank Father Dominic at the QUB Chaplaincy for facilitating this chat. Sir James Macmillan has become one of the most successful and prolific composers of our time, alongside a busy conducting schedule with top orchestras around the world. In 2014, he founded his own music festival, the Cumnock Tryst, in his hometown of Ayrshire. Welcome, Sir James. It's great to have you
Hello,
here.
it's great to be with you.
Brilliant. That's the first time I've ever referred to somebody as Sir in a literal sense. Would you tell me a little bit about your knighthood? You were knighted in 2015, I believe.
Yes, well, it came as a big surprise, and no, I was very pleased to get the honour, and we went down to Windsor Castle. My dad, who's now dead, unfortunately, he lives down. He lived down in Wiltshire, and Windsor was the nearest place to where he was, and so we decided we'd try and bring him along. He was an old man by then. He loved it, actually. It was Prince William who did the sword thing with me, and they looked after my dad really well, and my wife and daughter came down with me. But it was lovely, I think, not just for me. I like to think of it as an award for all of us involved in the world of composition. It's
Yeah.
not often that new music, for example, gets a wider recognition. So that's one of the reasons why I grasped it with both hands. And I'd like to think that an award like that puts new music, puts the world of composition on the wider map, and brings what we do to other people's attention.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it has done for like young composers coming up, and like they must be looking at this and thinking, God, like it is a field that we need to like put more into now. Yeah, so what about you established your festival? That's rather recent memory, 2014.
Yeah,
Um, can you tell me what led you to this? Like,
yeah.
what was the need for you to bring this home, so to speak?
hmm hmm Well, I suppose all through my life, I had always been impressed by those composers who had set up their own festivals. Uh, the most important, the most famous one being at Aldborough, which had been set up by Benjamin Britten in the late 1940s after the Second World War. And then more recently, in the early 1970s, Peter Maxwell Davies set up his festival, the St Magnus Festival, up in Orkney. And I went up to Orkney when I was an undergraduate and to attend this. It was a very exciting thing for a young composer to go to a composer-led festival. And I was mightily impressed by what I saw. I saw that Peter Maxwell Davies had given a sense of ownership of this music festival to the local people. He'd got them involved, not just as volunteers and audience, but actually participants in the festival. There was a festival chorus had been formed. He was writing music for local musicians, but he was also bringing in the great musicians of the world to perform in little town halls and village halls and church halls and churches and so on. And there was a great atmosphere in a very faraway place. To most people, it's quite difficult to get up to Orkney. And I always wondered whether maybe someday I would do something similar. Well, the opportunity arose about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was quite clear that I had to make this festival in the town, in the part of the world where I come from originally. And although I haven't lived in Cumnock since I went to university, I do remember Cumnock as a very musical place. It was where I became a musician, and my early music making was made with school friends and relatives and other people in the community. I still have relatives in Cumnock. My wife is also from Cumnock. I've been together with Lynn since we were at school together way back in the 70s. Her mum still lives in the town. So I'm still there a lot, and it just seemed the natural place to build this. It's not, I suppose, Cumnock, East Ayrshire, it's not the kind of place where you normally associate a big festival like this, but we had huge ambitions for it. Along the lines of those composer-led festivals that I described at Aldeburgh, who knows, we could be a Scottish Aldeburgh one day if we keep going, or certainly the St Magnus Festival. And so Nicola Benedetti is our patron. She's also an Ayrshire lass. She has relatives in the area. She has performed there. We've had some of the great choirs of the world, like the 16 and the Kingsingers and the Westminster Cathedral Choir have come and performed. We have wonderful chamber musicians. And the concerts take place in, again, like Aldeburgh and St Magnus, in little halls, in little churches, in schools. And this would have been our 7th festival this year, but obviously COVID put a stop to that. But we're hoping to get back, and we're working on on next year's festival, and we're doing lots of events during the year to make up for that. And actually, we've become an all-year-round event organizer, which is
I'd read that. Yeah, I'd read about that, and I was thinking, what a year! You're trying to expand, and then just life intervenes. Obviously, it's just horrible. But I was looking at last year's program, and it just seemed jam packed, like 4 events a day, and there were big events. Like a lot of them could have been, like there were events in their own right, like. Take away the festival and you still could put that on and gather loads of people to them. Yeah. Like the one that interested me, where you were writing new music for dancers and also getting young composers from RCS involved, and that just seemed like a huge ambitious project that you just like had within another huge ambitious project. So yeah, very impressive.
I mean, we throw a lot at this one way or another, and we're certainly in the business of trying to encourage younger composers, especially from Scotland. Actually, a lot of our composers have been Ayrshire based. It's not exclusively an Ayrshire festival, but certainly we've had RCS composers still in their 20s, writing music for professional ensembles, writing music for the young dancers. But more than that, we have projects which take us into schools and get teenagers to write their own music for the likes of the Scottish Chamber Orchestra musicians. And we're trying to encourage composition and invention at lots of different levels, including right down to primary school levels. And we do a lot of improvisation workshops with young string players, and I will write music for young players, young singers, young choirs, and then try to give a real public platform for all this at what is it essentially now an international festival, and we have visitors coming from all over the world. Our audience is mainly local people, of course. We want the people of Ayrshire especially to have a sense of pride and ownership over it. But there are people coming from America, from Canada, from Israel, from the continent, and we've established a bit of a reputation internationally. The New York Times reviewed us in our first year, for example. We've got a lot of national coverage, of course, and so we're very excited about what we're doing, and the people of Cumnock, the people of Ayrshire are delighted at what they're able to do as well. As I say, we took a leaf out of Maxwell Davies's book, and we formed a festival chorus, mainly made up of people from Ayrshire, and I've written a big piece for them in the last few years to coincide with the armistice in 2018, the centenary of the armistice. And that involved our chorus, it involved one of our local brass bands, but it also meant that we brought in some fabulous professional musicians, international stars like Ian Bostridge. and the Edinburgh Quartet, who performed this piece alongside the amateurs. And that gets to the heart and ethos of what the festival is about. It's bringing in the big names: Stephen Osborne, the great pianist; Nicola Benedetti, of course. We're going to have the Scottish Chamber Orchestra soon, and many others. But get them to work with local people, either in a specially composed piece or a big improvisation session that produces a piece of music. And I'm delighted that all the great musicians we invite all say yes to coming to Cumnock, and that they see the sense of outreach that is working with people in the community and young people as a very important part of their work for us.
Yeah. As you were kind of alluding to before, COVID has brought a stop, or has definitely limited what we can do now. And I was kind of looking at what you're working at the minute, and you've got the next date I could see you working on was your the Dutch premiere of your Christmas Oratorio in January. That seems to be the next performance, and I'm wondering how preparation for that is going, and is it going to be live, a big audience, or is it going to be limited?
Who knows? You're right. I mean, this is a piece I wrote. I just finished it at the beginning of the year. It's a big piece. I've just called it my Christmas Oratorio. Back, of course, has written something approximating to the same title. So my piece is a full evening. It's a full night's work, a full concert, as it were. So it's a big piece. It's written in two parts. The premiere was meant to be next month in London with the London Philharmonic Orchestra, and they were the principal commissioners. Yeah. But there were other commissioners involved as well. The Netherlands Radio Philharmonic Orchestra and the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. Now, at the moment, the Dutch performance is going ahead. As I understand it, it will be, and what's been happening in the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam is that they've had small audiences. They've laid out tables and chairs in the auditorium, so the audience capacity is right down, but they have been performing live shows there. That may be hitting the head again because things are happening all over the world, really. There's this ebb and flow of possibilities. Sometimes possibilities come and then they go. But at this moment, in the middle of November, I'm expecting to go there and perform this piece in January. And it would be with their orchestra, the Netherlands Philharmonic Orchestra, their fabulous big choir, the Groot Omroep Corps, maybe reduced a bit as we're talking about, because they've got to be careful about singers. So, but it would still be a choir of about 30 or 40, and we would use some amplification. Now, that's something we didn't think we'd ever accept in the world of music, but you know, we're forced into these situations, but I think it can be very tastefully done and very sensitively done. And then there are two soloists, Christopher Maltman and Mary Bevan. And well, if we're allowed, I'll head over there in the second or third week of January, do all the work in Hilversum, where the orchestra's based, and then we're on. It's a Saturday matinee show, so it'll be an afternoon performance. But we may not know what's happening until the week itself. And if that's hitting the head, then the next performance that's lined up is December 2001. And it could be the Melbourne performance, which I'm booked to do, or it could be the London performance, which might be back on track by then. But so we're all waiting to see what will happen. And as you know, the world of music and the world of the arts, the performing arts, have been hit very, very badly. And we're all on hold, and you know, our performances have all been destroyed. Really, I mean, I'm lucky in the sense that I write music, so I continue with the day job. But a lot of my colleagues have had their income streams cut to nothing, and have had to reassess their whole lives. I suppose we're all doing that to an extent, and one hopes that some sort of normality will come back in 2021.
Yeah, no, I sympathise with the suspended plans and everything. Like our group, we've only been able to have 2 rehearsals and then shut down again for lockdown. And that lockdown's now been extended. It was meant to end today, so we would have been rehearsing next week, but that's all up in the air. But yeah, there was in preparing a new work like this, one of our bass players has asked. He's looking to go into orchestral performing when he's older, and he's wondering, from a rehearsal perspective, what's the difference between performing one of these new works or preparing to perform one of these new works and versus the standard repertoire. And for you, you would be conducting this piece. So from your perspective, how do you feel rehearsing your own music versus something different?
Yeah, well, I mean, for the performing musicians, it's always a journey of discovery, seeing a brand new piece and getting to grips with it in a way that can be quite bewildering at first. I mean, how do you make sense of all these new notes and sounds, and how will the conductor, whether the conductor is the composer or not, convey the meaning of the music to them? Whether I'm conducting or not, I always feel on the side of the musician, and want to make them feel at peace and at ease with a new experience. The London performance, which would have been next month, was not going to be given by me. It was going to be given by Vladimir Yurovsky, who's the principal conductor of the London Philharmonic Orchestra. And my hope was that I'd go along and learn from him, as I always do. I go along, and I've always watched conductors all through my life, whether they're conducting my music or not. But it's conducting, as you're aware, it's quite a strange phenomenon. It's quite a dark art in a way. I still don't know how this mysterious thing works, and you sometimes get asked about what you do that makes this work, or work in this way and not in this way, and I can't really tell them, because it's all to do with something mysterious and something to do with musical personalities and so on. But as far as conducting my own music, and I will hopefully do the Dutch performance of this piece and then the Australian premiere, I have to relearn a score of mine from scratch. After completing a piece of music, there is a kind of creative forgetting happens, in that everything that's been in my head it took a year to write that piece. So I was living with it day by day, every day. When you get to the double bar, for some strange reason, it all just collapses. It just kind of dissolves. The whole panoply and structure and design and nuance and detail, it just seems to dissolve, as if it's like waking up from a dream. So maybe that's what has to happen, because the composer has to move on to the next piece. But it's actually quite helpful in a way, because it forces me as the composer-conductor to, in a sense, relearn the piece from scratch. And that's what I have to do. I have to learn the piece from a very different perspective, just as if I was learning a piece by another composer. Right. And that's what I've been doing these last few weeks, in the hope that I can go ahead. So learning all the practical things, working out a kind of strategy for rehearsal, working out what are the difficult bits, how to break things down, how to balance things. It's no different when one is conducting one's own music to conducting a piece of Beethoven or Mahler or Shostakovich.
Yeah, I wouldn't have expected that. I would have maybe expected you would have just had an understanding of it that just stayed with you, but that's incredible.
Well, there is a residual understanding, I suppose, but it's a very weird feeling. It's like something you've been so closely associated with a piece of music for a long period of time. You're at one with it. You are the piece of music, but then it's a weird thing. It's a mysterious and strange thing that happens. You wake up. I mean, composing is a bit like being in a dream. I've always been told I've been a bit of a dreamer, sometimes getting into trouble at school for not focusing too much. And but I think there needs to be a dreamlike experience for a composer. Um, and but you've got to wake up from the dream, otherwise you'll get lost. And every new piece is a new dream. Like every night, you have a new dream.
That brings me beautifully on to what I wanted to discuss in the guts of this talk. Well, I'm wondering what your perception of the compositional process is. So, is everything you do like a conscious decision, or do you sometimes feel like it comes from somewhere outside of yourself, or on a subconscious level, maybe?
Well, how long have you got? Yeah, I mean, I think that there has to be a balance. If you're a composer, you train in a certain way, and you have to get to grips with the abstract nature of music, the practical things, the technical things. It's a highly technical business, music, as you know. Any branch of music is, and composition is no less so. So you need to be in charge of technique. You need to have a control over how structure works, how design works, how you shape your harmony, how you shape your language. So to be in control of rhythmic devices and melodic instinct and so on, all that needs to be really worked at over years from the very early stage. However, there is another side of composition which is entirely mysterious, and even composers don't really know what's going on, and it's that instinct that drives you to be a composer in the first place. And I think I knew I wanted to be a composer, but even before knowing what that would mean, ever since the very first day I was given an instrument at school when I was a little boy, and it was a little plastic recorder, as most British and Irish school children at one stage were.
I remember the days. Yeah.
And no, for most people, for most kids, it's not the seismic experience in life that it was to turn out to be for me. But I remember it was like a light going on, and the instinct to write music was there in those first few days. I had this desire to make my own shapes and to play them on the instrument, and very soon I moved on to other instruments like the trumpet and the cornet and the piano and so on. But that instinct to make my own music, to write down my own melodic shapes and so on, came very, very soon. And it's just something you're given. I think it's something that lives with you in your DNA or in your subconscious right from the very beginning of your life, and that's what's at play as well with all the technical things. And to try to describe how that works is it's kind of impossible, really. It's all about inspiration and motivation and that kind of thirst to create.
So would you say it's almost like the craft is there for after you've got something, you've got like a melodic idea or something, and then you use all of your years of experience, and that completes it? Would it be something like that?
I think so. I mean, if the craft is not worked at, you end up being indisciplined and indeed incompetent. So you can have all these wonderful ideas that come down from heaven or whatever, but if you can't actually shape them into something that communicates technically and in purely musical terms to the musicians, and then through them to the audience, then those ideas are worthless, and they'll remain locked up somewhere. You've got to hone these ideas into a very practical, technical shape, and that's why the art of composition is as much an artisan's craft as it is an artist's craft. You've got to do the groundwork right throughout your life.
Yeah. Well, clearly, like I was looking at on the Boozy and Hawks, and it said you had over 300 works, and of course that includes your 5 symphonies and this oratorio, like huge works, as well as so clearly the discipline is there, but what would you is there a way for you to say, right, this is how you get that sort of day by day approach to just keep grafting?
Yeah, I think I spend a lot of time with younger composers. I've done some teaching over the years, and I still get to do the odd masterclass and lesson. This kind of question crops up a lot with young composers. How do you go about it, and what if you get a writer's block or a composer's block? How do you deal with it? And that does happen. It happens in all branches of the arts. I think with composition and maybe some other things, even writing words, as it were, there's something about the block which is not a block. I think the dreamlike state that I was talking about earlier, that instinct to write, to create, goes underground. It may go to sleep, it may go into the subconscious, and that isn't a block. It's just gone into a very different part of your soul or your mind or whatever. And young composers, I tell them, you've just got to be patient. You may actually be composing and not being aware of it. You may actually be composing in your sleep. You may be actually composing when you're doing something mundane during the day. Sometimes you just need that sort of detachment from the direct attention at the desk or at the paper or at the piano or whatever, to free the waters again. And I don't think there's ever a block, really. Even when it can seem like years, it means that it's all gone into the subliminal or the subconscious, and it will emerge or re-emerge in some conscious shape somewhere down the line. And so I tell the younger composers not to worry about that. There can be things that they can do, and in the early stages, I think the practical and technical exercises are very good, and a lot of composition teachers do those kind of things, getting the harmony to work, getting the orchestration right, thinking carefully about orchestration, instrumentation. Counterpoint exercises are vital. I mean, it may seem a rather dry exercise when one's doing it at university or college, but I think for the composer, it's a very vital training. Even when one's doing specious counterpoint exercises, imitating Palestrina or Bach 2-part, 3-part inventions, fugal expositions, they can seem very strange and pointless to many, but actually, I think they're very important exercises that can be done. And exercises can be extended from that. I like sometimes setting exercises to some of the composers that I see, the ones that I deal with on. I mean, I work with the London Philharmonic Orchestra, or have done until recently, with a group of composers I've been seeing, and I get them to work at certain things specifically, right? Like, write a monody so that they're focusing on a line, just a single line, or write a piece of music that is only about texture, it's only about chords, so that they're thinking about one thing and one thing only, or write a piece of music that's only based on rhythm and only uses rhythmic values and is not pitch based, so that again they're focusing on what pulses can be. These can be really focused ways of getting the attention honed and sorting out some very specific things in isolation.
Yeah, what you were saying there about composing even when you're not sitting at a desk or something like that. I've found that myself, even in writing or anything, like. And I was wondering if you think that your spiritual practices, or because I know you're a very practicing Catholic, and or would that be fair to say? Yes.
Yep, that's fair.
Yeah. So I'm wondering any of the things that come with that. So like the fasting days or the going a lot of silent prayer, if that impacts you, because I know myself, if I'm maybe fasting or something, there's a mental clarity that comes with that, and I'm wondering if that impacts this maybe this subconscious thought or this inspiration that we were talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everyone's different, but I think there is a correlation between silence and music, for example. And I think a lot of composers, whether they're spiritual or religious or not, recognize the importance of silence. In the silence of our own hearts is where the music begins. It's where we engage with our deep thoughts. But actually, there's something about the apparent nothingness of silence, that where the music begins and the notes can actually germinate. And I think John Cage was onto something on his focus and his invitation to the rest of us to focus on the silence, because or even to listen to things in very different ways, to clear one's head, to clear one's soul of distractions and allow something to happen. And there may be a correlation there with the whole Judeo-Christian experience of prayer as well. And certainly composers in the deep past of our tradition, our heritage, would engage with prayer, or would allow prayer to be the bedrock for where the music came from. I'm thinking about Haydn and probably many composers before him, Bach and Palestrina, and so they would all have engaged with the silence of their hearts, and the silence of their hearts would be a very prayerful place. I do think things change just because the world becomes, on the face of it, less religious. And if you speak to people who love music, for example, a discursive music like classical music, but not all. You know, people that we spend our lives with among who are not necessarily religious at all, but will use certain phrases to describe the impact of that music on their lives, like music is a spiritual art form. Music is the most spiritual of the arts. And when non-religious people, atheists and agnostics who love music use these terms, I think they're onto something, and maybe they're recognizing a shared truth, that there is something in the art form of music, the power of music, which gets into the crevices of the human soul. And I think that that's why you don't find the culture wars that sometimes are destroying so much of our outside world, are quite absent from the world of music. You know, that in the world of music, people of very different world views and spiritual views come together with a shared love of this art form that has transformed their lives, an art form which demands something of their listening obedience. And there is something about that obedience of listening which has analogies with prayer and contemplation. It's certainly the case in my work and the way that I approach my work as a composer.
Yeah, talking about the obedient listener there, the common classical musical audience is an audience who have worked on the competence of listening to classical music for perhaps their whole life. They've played an instrument when they're younger, and they've studied it maybe, extensively or not. Is there a way for you to compose which impacts these people, but can also be discovered and maybe appreciated by maybe an innocent person to this sort of music?
That's a very good question. In a lifelong engagement with something as demanding as classical music, if that's what we want to call it, is important. And we've been very lucky to have had that right from our early days. And many musicians have that life. They're introduced to music in some way when they're very young, either as players or singers, playing in bands and singing in choirs. And it's the beginning of a lifelong journey in music. There's something vital about those early encounters with music. Does that mean that those who don't get those early encounters or those opportunities are missing out? Probably does, but it doesn't mean that they can latch on at various points in life. And you begin to hear of people who discover different kinds of music, more challenging music, classical music, non-popular forms of music in later life. And that's happening more and more. And there is no one way of engaging with classical music. And my hope is that when I write music, that it can engage with people of many different levels of engagement with tradition. Some will have knowledge, a deep knowledge of the repertoire and the context and the heritage. Some will have minimal knowledge and experience of that. But it's got to be able to communicate profoundly to as many people as possible. I suppose in my position, it's important that one doesn't get too involved in trying to second guess who your audience is, or even trying to second guess your listener. One has to write the music that's in your head, regardless of who's listening to it. Having said that, though, I think that I have an ideal listener in mind. And what do I mean by that? Who is my ideal listener? I think my ideal listener is someone who is curious to hear things they have not heard before. And you get them in all walks of life. And you get them, some with a huge engagement with music and history, musical history, some with minimal engagement with musical history. But I think that curiosity has to be there, so that they make that initial step into the unknown, to hear something new, to have that excitement about hearing something new, something that have not heard before. And sometimes in the classical music audience, you meet people who don't have that curiosity. I don't know about you, but all through my life, I've met people who have had a wonderful engagement and education with music, but stop their mind, stop their ears, stop their hearts from engaging with things they don't know. They like what they know, they like what they know, and they know what they like, and that's it. And it sometimes means that they don't open their hearts and ears to people like me, that is a living composer. So sometimes an education in music isn't all that's required. Sometimes it can be a hindrance.
Yeah, I do. I know a lot of people whose curiosity extends to about 1920 and then stops.
Yeah.
But yeah, so would that be, I would say, a composer, as you say, you knew you were going to be a composer from very early age. It's more of a vocation than a profession. And is that your responsibility as a composer, to go into what is unknown and bring back from that and sort of transmit it to everyone else?
Well, I think delving into one's subconscious for musical inspiration, you're going to encounter the unknown at various levels. Whether that means absolutely brand new, unheard context is another matter. It has to be said, I mean, I would say there has been a fetish in the new music world for the unknown, or the almost a kind of fetish to avoid anything that is understood and anything that is recognizable. There was a time in music where a certain orthodoxy impressed on composers that they should not be making reference to anything from the past. For example, melody is old hat, harmony is old hat, anything that smacks of the 19th century, for example, was to be avoided, as that was old-fashioned and reactionary and so on. I think things have moved beyond that, so that you're finding a whole range of different kind of composers who are referencing not just the past, but maybe non-European musical cultures as well. You can feel that in minimalism, for example, and sometimes music from other cultures, like from the Far East, has invaded the world of the Western composer, and these are recognizable things, and they're there because they're recognizable. So I and many other living composers have lost that concern and anxiety to be always sounding brand new, because it leads to islands of non-communication. And not that I would ever want to play to the gallery or play to what the audience wants, as it were. But I feel that I want to communicate something. I'm in the business of communication. And if I can't communicate anything because the language is too abstruse or whatever, then that's a failing on my part.
Yeah, well, there definitely is in your music a conception of things that have come before, and melody is definitely very prominent.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm very conscious of the time here, but
It's all right. No,
so
it's all right.
I'll well, yeah, I would like to ask then, in reference to things from the past, bringing them into your music. You've done a lot of vocal settings based on text that has already come before, and I'm wondering how that does that impede your creative conception of a new work, or does that become your inspiration for the work?
Yes, well, I mean, I do set lots of texts. Some of those texts are by modern poets, and there's one in particular, Michael Simmons Roberts, that I work with very closely. I've also set a poem by the American poet Dana Gioia recently. But you know, a lot of the texts I do set are ancient. They're old. The Christmas Oratorio texts are poems by the likes of John Donne and Milton and Robert Southwell, but also scriptural sources and biblical sources. And I do find myself turning to liturgy a lot. I do write music for liturgy. I have written music that specifically is made for mass settings, for example, or motets that are written specifically for a date in the liturgical calendar. And sometimes there's a bit of overlap between the world of liturgy and the world of the concert hall. But even for the concert hall, as you suggested, I've been setting ancient texts and well-known texts, such as the Passion according to St. John and the Passion according to St. Luke. And these, of course, are texts known in our culture through knowledge of the Bible, but also in musical culture, because the likes of J.S. Bach have been there before us. And you do feel, or certainly I felt, as if you're wading in the steps of giants when you do turn your mind to these. And it can be quite terrifying, feeling that there are these frightening musical ghosts hovering over your shoulder as you get to grips with a passion setting, knowing what Bach has done, and the likes of Bach and the Bach passions are some of the great cultural pinnacles of Western civilization. And so there's all that on your shoulders. To be honest, it's a comfort knowing that you're, well, for me anyway, that I'm stepping into those shoes or trying to. But you know, I'm writing for a very different world. I'm not writing for liturgy. In the case of my passions, I was writing for a concert world. I was writing for people who believe and people who don't. So it has to communicate on a number of different metaphysical levels as well, spiritual levels. But to be honest, I find that that's an exciting place to be. in many ways, I do regard myself as quite a traditionalist. I'm interested in sonata form, for example, as well as Judeo-Christian civilization, and making a melding of these things in my work as a living composer, as a modern composer that's lived through the revolutions of the likes of Stockhausen and Boulez and so on, and all the other styles that have arisen in the 20th, now the 21st century. It's an exciting place to be, although making the choices that one has to make is more difficult now than ever. And it's a choice about language, about musical language, as well as the texts that you suggest that are very traditional.
Yeah, and as you say, standing on the shoulders of these giants, waiting in their shadow, however you want to put it, does that musical imprint? Do you listen to the settings a lot before your own setting?
Actually, I try to avoid them in the run up to composing something. I mean, they are known to me through musical memory and so on. But when it comes to the task at hand, I don't want to have it. I don't want to have these great models first and forefront in my mind.
Yeah.
I want them to be there as a kind of subliminal memory, and therefore I need to go on with it in my own terms. But you can't avoid them. You know, if you're brought up as a musician, you know what the Bach, Matthew, and John Passions are, or you know what the symphonies of Beethoven are as you write your own symphonies. And
that's perfectly understandable. Last sort of question here, kind of related to the last one. The last one was about like texts and how they inform your composition. How about instruments? If you're writing for an unfamiliar instrument or even a familiar instrument, how far does the instrument affect your say your melody or something? Or is it the other way around? Do you conceive of a melody and then think, oh, that would be perfect for trumpet? Like, how does that work?
I think it goes back to this issue about technique and knowledge of the world of music. You have to learn a lot as a composer. You have to be aware of all the instruments and to take them on board and to feel inside these instruments, to know what their best qualities are, to feel what idiomatic writing for a particular instrument is like, what it means, the range of the instrument, where it sounds strong, where it sounds less strong, how you balance it and so on. I mean, for example, just this week, I was doing a Zoom class with teenagers in a school down in Ayrshire. Normally, I would have been down there in the class working with them on their compositions, but we're doing it by Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all this sort of thing. And trying to teach composition at that distance is quite tricky. But one of the things that did come up in the conversation was idiomatic writing. And they're all meant to be writing music for brass quintet. And some of them are brass players, some are not. And as I could see some of their music beginning to emerge, some of the melodies and the lines could have been played in any instrument. And I asked them to focus on the sound of brass instruments. If you're a brass player, what does a brass instrument do best? What are the kind of things that you associate with trumpets, for example? What does a fanfare do? What is the kind of why do these instruments have a kind of outdoor quality? What are the origins of these instruments? The hunting horn origins of it, the battle horn, for example, the military aspect of it. You know, the very public nature of some of these instruments. These are the features: trumpets, horns, trombones, tuba, that you should be focusing on. Trumpets could do triple and double tonguing in a way that a violin can't. So try and imagine yourself into the actual instrument itself. So even from an early stage of a composer's development, I think it's important to have an understanding of the instruments, and that means getting to grips, watching what your fellows are doing all the time in band practice and orchestral practice, reading up about the ranges of instruments so that you're not writing for notes that are off the scale, literally. And in a sense, understanding the absolute core power and meaning of each individual instrument.
Yeah, sorry, I said that was the last one, but I just thought, as you were saying, does notational technology then impede that? So you say you have to know the range of the instruments, you have to know its character, but anybody from whatever age can input notes into, say, Sibelius or something, and notes that are impossible for the instrument will come up as like, no, this is red, this is, you can't play this. But notes that are in, like, say, non-idiomatic, or patterns that are non-idiomatic, it won't come up the same way. So does that impede composers?
There's a lot about those technologies which can be useful, but actually there's a lot that is very incomplete for the needs of a composer. And it's very difficult to get this over to young composers especially, but sometimes the technology can be an impediment in itself. Just by typing in things, it can seem very straightforward, especially if you've got this technological skills, which I don't. But you begin to rely on the technology too much. But it was ever thus. Composers who relied too much on the piano could make fundamental mistakes when it came to writing for orchestras or writing for choirs. If you're simply plodding away, playing notes at a keyboard, the piano itself can mislead. And I think on that basis also, Sibelius can mislead, because it gets you into a way of thinking that is maybe not very realistic. And it's not just about what instruments can do, it's actually about the nature of composition itself. And so I always impress on young composers who have an understanding of the technology that I don't have, that sometimes it's best to go back to basics, to write music away from anything, to actually write music in silence with a paper or pen, with pencil paper, pen and paper, and imagining what you're hearing and actually writing it down. Then you can check things, of course, you can check things over on the piano, as I do. But sometimes going from brain, eye to hand to paper, and hearing the sound, and it might be a sound of a voice, for example, a particular kind of voice, or a number of voices in combination, that make more sense in the silence of your own hearts, in the silence of your own imagination, and then that has to be conveyed to paper and pencil, and then that can be the best starting point for composing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm incredibly grateful that you came and had this chat. I've certainly gained a lot of insight, and I hope this comes across to the members of the orchestra and whatever wider audience.
It's very great to meet you, Colm, and I'd like to give all my best wishes to the members of your orchestra and the others who may be seeing this, and I hope they all are in good heart and will return to a wonderful life of music making sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay.